media reports not making pleasant reading, it has to be said, for Joe Biden this morning. Words like panic, shock, unwell are being used. Tabloids in the United Kingdom, for example, lambasting Mr. Biden's performance, saying it was a disaster for the president. An opinion column for the National here in the UAE said the debate was, quote, an unprecedented fiasco. US President Joe Biden's re-election candidacy crashed and burned spectacularly at the debate against former president and convicted felon Donald Trump. Well, Editor-in-Chief of the National, Mina Al-Arabi, joining me now in the studio. CNN's international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, is in London. And let's just start with you. The international media is weighing in. What's being said?
You saw the criticism there from the UK media, essentially saying what's being said in the United States, but it's all the newspapers here. And I think it's perhaps more shocking, you know, for United States allies, because they don't get to hear as much of President Biden and the former President Trump as people watching and listening in the United States. So yes, every newspaper here is really shocked, I think, about how badly President Biden did and the implications, therefore, for his re-election. That was mirrored by what we heard in French newspapers, in Italian newspapers as well. Also, Greek newspapers suggesting, is this time for President Biden perhaps to move over? The harshest criticism, but perhaps not surprisingly so, coming in Russia, where he was absolutely lampooned in state media. One talk show host there saying that this debate was a show for pensioners. That does kind of ignore the fact that President Putin is of pensionable age as well. But that was the tone that they took, and really taking aim at President Biden and his poor performance there. We have heard from the Kremlin. The spokesman there said that President Putin didn't stay up and watch the debate last night, although one guesses he might have watched it later today. But the Kremlin saying they're not going to weigh in on the internal affairs of the United States. And I think that's a tone you can expect from all leaders around Europe. Whatever the newspaper headlines are saying, they're not going to weigh in on this internal matter in the United States. But it reaffirms for all of them the reality that they could be very well be dealing with a second presidency of Donald Trump, and it looks like, through his own words, a redux of the first. The worrying thing for all these leaders, of course, is it might be a redux of 2016-2020 Donald Trump. However, the world has moved on in those 4 years, and it's much more dangerous and much less stable, and that really underscores the concern.
Yeah. The reality is that Joe Biden leads the foremost superpower in the world, of course. And for many people watching this debate last night, that will really be at the forefront of their minds as they consider what they saw. Your own newspaper, The National, leading on the following: a Biden-Trump debate marred by falsehoods and incoherent remarks. Your initial reaction to what we saw?
It was painful. It was painful to watch. And you're right. In part, there was the falsehoods, not only from Trump. I mean, even President Biden coming out and saying, no U.S. soldiers have died on my watch, forgetting that Afghanistan 2021 was on his watch. 13 Marines died, and we've had other instances. So there was a glossing over of certain things, no real policies. And then there was the incoherence of Joe Biden. And as you said, the world is watching this, not only thinking what happens in the elections in November, but thinking today, what is happening in the world, be it in Gaza, be it in Ukraine, and all over the world. You need a strong president. And now, immediately, within 12 minutes of the debate, you started to hear sounds on social media where people from the Democratic side saying, we need to think about a change. Well, if that means that the sitting president doesn't have the confidence of the people who support him, where does that put the administration today, let alone thinking about what happens in elections?
And as Zain Ibish, writing an opinion piece in your paper today, you know, questioning whether Joe Biden shouldn't step away at this point. You bring up US foreign policy, and I think it's important that we discuss this. Not much substance, it has to be said, in foreign policy in the debate last night. I do want to play what both candidates had to say about the Israel-Hamas war.
Everyone from the United Nations Security Council straight through to the G7 to the Israelis and Netanyahu himself have endorsed the plan I put forward. endorse the plan I put forward, which has 3 stages to it. The first stage is trade the hostages for a ceasefire. Second phase is a ceasefire with additional conditions. The third phase is the end of the war. The only one who wants the war to continue is Hamas.
He said the only one who wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
I mean, your response to what we heard.
I mean, the fact that Biden, yes, did present this plan and first called it an Israeli plan and then withdrew and said this was his plan. And yet the Israeli prime minister has not listened to him. So actually highlighting once again the weakness of the current US president. And then to hear Donald Trump coming in and saying, actually, the Israelis want to continue the war, which is the truth. I mean, you see that from the current government. Despite all the attempts to say that Trump is saying falsehoods, there's also some truth in what he says. And there is that point. And then for him to say, let them finish the job, gives you an idea of if there is a Trump presidency, what we can look forward to January onwards.
Mina, I want to bring up a tweet from Vali Nasser, who's a regular guest on this show, and I know you know Vali well as well. He wrote, after the debate, the US will have even less leverage in managing crises in Gaza, Lebanon, and with Iran. A long lame duck administration that the region thinks will not be back makes for more dangerous and unpredictable times in the months ahead. And you alluded to this at the beginning of this conversation. We've got 5 months before the election. We have no idea what's going to happen at this point between now and the conventions in 6 weeks' time, let alone what happens between now and November and then beyond. Does that worry you as much as it worries Vali?
Absolutely. There have been concerns again about Joe Biden and his abilities currently as president. We've heard different reports from people who sit in meetings with him, if he needs to have notes and so forth, but then sometimes he's absolutely lucid in there. But the reality is this administration now has gone into complete election mode, even though there are very, very pressing issues. And as Vali points out in his tweet, and as we've been covering at The National, there is a vacuum of American leadership. And so what does that look like? And it feels like a lame duck presidency now. Now, if Joe Biden decides that he will let somebody else run his place, that changes the whole discussion. But at the moment, that seems like a long shot. And so if it is going to be Biden running for president, it's almost people will stop listening to what is coming out of Washington until we see what happens after the elections, which is worrying at a time when, as you know, here in this region, the U.S. does still have clout.
Nick, thank you, Mina. I'm kind of speechless in some ways about where to go with this conversation, because it's so important. And when you talk about the fact that there has, in this part of the world, been a sense there's been a vacuum of US leadership for so long, this just underscores that and makes it so much more worrying. Nick, this is what Donald Trump had to say about NATO last night.
Just going back to Ukraine for 1 second. We have an ocean separating us. The European nations together have spent $100 billion, or maybe more than that, less than us. Why doesn't he call them and say, you got to put up your money like I did with NATO? I got them to put up hundreds of billions of dollars. The Secretary General of NATO said Trump did the most incredible job I've ever seen. They wouldn't have any, they were going out of business. We were spending almost 100% of the money was paid by us.
I mean, there'll be, again, people all over the world watching, listening to what he said, calling him out, you know, on the falsehoods, on the exaggeration about the way that people have responded to how he was conducting himself with NATO. Be that as it may, as you watch this, and as we consider that the Ukraine war continues, and as administrations around the world, leaders around the world will be considering very seriously now what a Donald Trump administration looks like or might look like going forward. What's your sense, Nick?
Look, it's a redux, isn't it? And it's a redux into a more dangerous period. I said that before. But he is talking again about trying to get more money from NATO countries. You don't get money from NATO countries. They commit to spending more of their defense spending. No one gets there isn't a big pot of money, and the United States didn't put 100% in, or nearly 100%, as Donald Trump said. It was about 71% at the time. NATO has increased its spending, but clearly his message is going to come back and it's going to be more of the same. What he had to say about President Zelensky of Ukraine. We can't keep spending the money this way. He made it sound like Zelensky comes and gets whatever he wants. There are a lot of falsehoods in there. What we're going to take away from this is that Donald Trump, if he wins again, is going to attack NATO the same way he did before, is going to enable Putin potentially, is certainly indicating to Putin that the war would end at the end of the year before he even became president, which indicates to Putin that he can double down, despite the economic woes that Russia faces, double down, make all the gains you can this year, and that maybe President Trump by then will be making a deal with you, the terms of which we're not clear on.